just Mr. Kai. But in school, Jackal. I could go out, man, I could cry a guy. Great can. I could not, my make I couldn't not to us. I took it. I took it. How would do it? How would do it? I couldn't do it. Clear. I can't. I can't. Yeah, nasi mari.
Hello. You just heard from Oma Katrina, one of only 2 people left who speak the ancient indigenous language of Nu, one of South Africa's oldest languages. Now in her late 80s, she's a living embodiment of the urgency of the work the language activists on this panel engage with. Habari ya leo. Asanteni sana for joining us at the inaugural Jalada Africa Language and Translation Symposium. My name is Wanjeri Gakuru. I am a journalist, essayist, filmmaker, and I have the honor of serving as moderator for this panel and co-curator of the symposium. Gathered here are folks who are using new publishing tools, media, and technology to save, revive, advance, and preserve African languages. Let me introduce them to you. Elinor Sisulu is the executive director of the Puku Foundation, a reading, promotion, and book curation organization that aims to ensure that all children have access to quality, culturally relevant literature in all South African languages. She's an award-winning writer and human rights activist with extensive experience in literature and reading promotion activities. Dr. Chip Rosetti is an editor and translator of Arabic literature. His publishing translations include the novel Beirut, Beirut by Sonala Ibrahim, the graphic novel Metro, A Story of Cairo, Utopia by Ahmed Khalid Taufik, and Saint Teresa and Sleeping with Strangers by Baha Abed Mejid. I know I've massacred the name, I apologize. His translations have also appeared in World Literature Today, The White Review, Granta, amongst others. He has a PhD in Arabic from the University of Pennsylvania and is currently translating a text on the wonders of creation by a 12th century Andalusian traveler. Salomon Kabongo is a doctorate candidate in computer science at Leibniz University in Hanover, a research assistant at the AI Future Lab at the L3S Research Center, and an active member of the Masakana Initiative. His academic background includes an MSc in Mathematics Science from the University of Western Cape in South Africa, and an MSc from the African Master of Machine Intelligence at the University of Ghana, sponsored by Google and Facebook through the African Institute of Mathematical Sciences. And finally, Nanjala Nyabola is a Nairobi-based political analyst, writer, and humanitarian advocate. Her accomplished academic career has focused on forced migration in Africa and includes 2 MSc degrees from the University of Oxford, where she attended as a Rhodes Scholar. She also holds a JD from Harvard Law School. Nanjala has also published 2 books. The first is Digital Democracy Analogy. I think that's correct. Analogy Politics. That is a very difficult word this day, and Traveling While Black, essays inspired by a life on the move. Welcome to all of you. Welcome all of you.
Thanks.
Super, your CVs are stellar. I'm really excited for the conversation we're going to have. So my first question is, what would you say your work is specifically in response to? What are the current deficits within the space that you operate in that compelled you to pursue your work? Maybe we can begin with Elinor, given that we heard from Katrina. Oma Katrina. Elinor, you're muted.
I thought I was. Am I muted now? Okay.
Yes,
Thank you very much. And I'm so glad to be on the panel with this amazing people. I'm glad we have a computer scientist as well, because I've been thinking for a long time that we need to have them in the discussion on literature. We literary types tend to stick to literature in our own circles. And I think we have to have interdisciplinary conversations to support our languages. So I am a children's literature specialist and concerned about the fact that we don't have vibrant children's literature in our languages. Even when we do have the books, they don't travel. So, for example, an amazing children's book written in Gikuyu would not travel to other languages. So we don't have a big a practice of translating across languages, which is really very unfortunate. In the process of our work, we came across Oma Katrina, who she said that there were two people who lived speaking Ngu. Recently, a brother died, and she's the only one, a mother tongue speaker. And she's taught her granddaughter and another person, but they are not mother tongue speakers. They've done the orthography of the language through, they had assistance from University of Western Cape linguists. So the language has been written, it has an orthography, and we've published the first book. But, you know, given that she's 88 years old, it's still in a very precarious situation. So our concern, obviously, the digital space is important and the internet is important, but to actually use the internet as a tool to promote our languages is not enough to say, can internet save languages? Yes, internet is an important tool, but in order for the internet or to save languages or to have a role in saving languages, we need to provide the data. Yeah. We need to reward the content creators. So someone like, and we need to recognize our indigenous knowledge systems. Yeah, I'll stop there and hear what others have to say.
No, actually, it's a really good, kind of segue to what Salomon is doing, which is in artificial intelligence and machine learning. How can we use data science to advance African languages? And is that the question that kind of compels you and drove your work? What is that gap that existed that prompted you to engage with the work that you do?
So basically we found out, and we noticed, as most of you could have noticed, that there is something missing in the current implementation of the technology as it is. For example, if you go on YouTube and you are maybe watching a video and you are not comfortable with English, you can get this subscription. There's this CC symbol that can help you get the live transcription. And recently they introduced the translation, where you can actually be listening a video on English, but you can actually see it also in German or some other languages. But all these technologies, they don't provide support for African languages, and which is actually unfortunate, because we have the newer generation. We have children that are coming, and a lot of people that unfortunately they spend a lot of time over the internet. So, but how can we? That's the question as we ask ourselves as data scientists. How can we make sure that people don't get lost in only knowing English and French and forgetting completely about the language that they are born, like where they're coming from, which actually will make that we will end up, I'm from Congo, for example, and I have difficulty speaking my mother tongues. Sometimes you think that you can speak it unless you meet someone who speaks only that language, and you realize, okay, it looks like I'm missing something. So as a data scientist and machine learning researchers, we came together and said that we need to change the story, because we realized that in a lot of top natural language processing, which is a conference for researchers in an area of machine learning, there were almost no publication that are focusing on African languages, where the continent itself, we have a lot of languages, but there is almost no people interested in working in that. So that was actually the birth of Masakane, which actually means we build together. So we got people from all over Africa. We came together and said that let's change the story. Let's implement our own translation. Let's make the internet African, if I can say it that way. Because let's say today people have technology like Siri, we have Smart House, we have Google Talk, or whatever technology you may be using. You can speak to them, but you should be able to speak to them in Swahili. You should be able to speak to them in any African language. And those are the things that motivated our work in Masakani.
Yeah. Again, it's like all of you knew how to plug the next person. Nanjala works specifically with Swahili, working with individuals in Kenya and Tanzania to create a really fantastic project. So could you please tell us what was it that you saw was missing in the space that compelled you to do the work that you do?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here and to be in conversation with all of you, because it sounds like we are pulling in the same direction, even though we're having like different entry points to this issue. My background is really not in linguistics. My background is in digital rights, and I've been a digital rights activist for the better part of the last decade. And one of the things that really started to pop out to me as a person who grew up multilingual, like most Kenyans, is that, like Salomon said, the internet assumes an English speaker, assumes an English user. Maybe a distant second will be a Chinese user, Mandarin user, German, French, all of these languages. But it doesn't really assume African language speaker as the user, as the person who's interacting with the technology. And especially when it came to digital rights, we had a huge issue in 2019 in Kenya with digital ID. And the government was basically giving us 30 days to register for this new digital ID program. And it was being done under a lot of threats. If you don't get this number, you will not get a birth certificate, a death certificate, a passport. You'll not be able to pay taxes. And in fact, that one we said, well, actually, that's fine. We were getting all of these threats. And thankfully, we had a community, the Nubian Rights Forum, that took the government to court and actually got a stay and ordered to stay the implementation. But what really stood out to me as we were doing all of that advocacy was, where was everybody? That it was a core group of people who were always the same people, that we would see each other at the conferences, and we would see each other at the protests, and we would see each other at the courthouses. But the group wasn't growing, even though we had been doing this for like 10 years, as I said, since the 2007 election. And one thing that really stood out for me as being multilingual was, for example, when we were giving public speeches and conversations, a lot of the key concepts in digital rights did not exist in English, in Kiswahili, sorry. So you would have someone say something like, privacy ni kitu muhimu sana ili kulinda digital rights zetu. And that sort of going in and out of English and Kiswahili is very organic for Kenyan speakers, because that's how we speak, but it doesn't help you get the lexical context of the word. Yes. It doesn't help you connect the word to something else. So the idea of rights has to be connected to the idea of justice, has to be connected to the idea of society. And so what really I kept thinking to myself was, we need the words to exist in their linguistic context so that people can connect data protection to the idea of security as expressed in Kiswahili. So I thankfully received a grant from the Stanford Digital Civil Society Lab in December of last year, and spent the first half of this year working with senior scholars of Kiswahili in Kenya and Tanzania, which are the two main Kiswahili-speaking communities in East Africa. And we had people from all the major dialects of Kiswahili, so Kimvita, Kimbuja, which is the main sort of formal Kiswahili. And we just had workshops, and we had a WhatsApp group, and we were just trying to brainstorm these 52 core words in Kiswahili. What would the Kiswahili, in English, sorry, what would the Kiswahili word be? And we came up with a list, and this is the final product. It's a set of flashcards that are both in English and in Kiswahili, as you can see. And but the really cool part is, the words are rooted not just in one-to-one translation, but in context. So if you'll allow me just a few minutes more, the word udukizi, which is the word for surveillance, you'll know this word, Wangari, the kudoya is a Kiswahili word that's also a slang word that means, it doesn't just mean to look at someone's stuff with envy, but it also means to look at someone's stuff and to desire it for yourself, which is a word that is like, it's so Kiswahili, because Kiswahili can have a word for something so specific. And so we looked at the word kudoea and we thought to ourselves, well, what is surveillance? Surveillance is not just a question of looking at someone or the government watching you, but is the government watching you with a desire to change your behavior? It's the government or someone is watching you with a desire to let you know that you're being watched and to modify your behavior. And so the word that we use for surveillance is actually udukizi. And udukizi is rooted in kudoea. And it really just means sort of watching you, observing your behavior with the desire to modify it. And so that's the kind of work that we did. And so we produced the flashcards. The flashcards are on sale, but we also gave the words out for free because this is not, words are not proprietary to me. Obviously, we want the flashcards to pay for themselves. We're handing them out for free. So when you buy a set of flashcards, when you buy one, you actually pay for two, and that allows us to produce a second set that we're giving out to high school students for free. And hopefully the next time there's a massive infringement in our digital rights, we'll have critical mass, we'll have ordinary people, we'll have young people who don't remember what the world was like before there was internet. That's why we're targeting high schoolers. We have a generation that does not remember, the phones with the padlock and they don't remember what that's like. And so that's why we're targeting high schoolers, because we think that these words should be as organic to them as tweeting and TikTok and all of these things that we didn't need to know 20, 30 years ago. So that's the project, and that's what we're working on.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And again, that leads us wonderfully to Dr. Rosetti, who has been working in translation, specifically with Arabic literature, and has been in this space for 20 years. What was it that compelled you to get into this space? And do you hear this this question of, not really doing one-to-one translation, but really making sure that you've conveyed the intention, the emotion from one language to the next? Oh, you're muted. You're muted, sir.
Yeah, that's better. Yes, first of all, thank you for inviting me onto the panel. This has been fascinating to hear these very different perspectives on all hovering around some of the same issues here that we're dealing with. When I was first approached, I thought to myself, well, certainly Arabic could hardly be considered an endangered language. But of course, like every language, even a language with as many speakers as Arabic has some of the same issues as sort of endangered by the encroachment of English as the global language that sort of is sort of making sort of strides against sort of reducing the interest in sort of younger speakers of Arabic in their own language. Arabic, of course, is also complicated by the issue of having several Arabics. Of course, there's the formal register, the modern standard Arabic, sometimes known as Fusha in Arabic, which most literature is written and published in, newspapers, books, formal language, and then of course the numerous spoken colloquials across the Arab world. So from Mauritania to Iraq and everywhere in between, which makes it much more complicated for sort of the sense that these are languages that are often not been seen as literary or worthy of sort of being treated as literature. There has been over the 20th century sort of a growing pushback against that. Colloquial poetry, novels written in colloquial as a way to push back against the formalizing use of Arabic. My own journey to Arabic began late in life. Before I was learning Arabic, I was an editor, an acquiring editor at New York publishing houses in the late 1990s, and occasionally would try to acquire books to present from other languages for translation. Often these were simply books in French or in German or something, and try to present it. Every time I kind of got shot down. Why? Because, no one is interested in how, the translation is an extra pain and extra cost. We can't do this. So I found that very frustrating personally. When I eventually turned to Arabic, I was fortunate to work at the American University in Cairo Press, so living in Cairo and sort of getting to get a feel for sort of the Arabic literary world there. So in many ways, it is very much an uphill struggle translating Arabic literature into English for an English reading audience. Certainly did not help in the United States with the war on terror and all the cliches about the Arab world that is sort of a reality you have to fight against. even at the level of book jackets and cliches that sort of crop up. So this is sort of it was an important lesson in sort of, I guess, in how you sort of have to reframe books. How do you treat authors as literary authors, not simply as sort of a sociological phenomenon, or that you trying to get readers and publishers to see you should buy this book, you should acquire this book, you should publish this book, you should read this author because they have something interesting to say, not because this is simply this is going to explain to you whatever's happening in the Middle East at the moment. This is not so that's one phenomenon. In my professional life, I work on a series that publishes pre-modern sort of medieval text in Arabic in facing page translations and then brings them out into English. So we try to keep it very broad, from travel literature to poetry to history to biography to law and eventually things in science. We've also published a cookbook from medieval Syria. We've launched sort of a sub-series, again, for younger readers, which is somewhat similar to the Buku Foundation. And because this is a real issue, particularly in places, our series is funded by the UAE in the Emirates, is that there is a younger generation very plugged into the internet and not as well versed in Arabic and not as interested in their own language in favor of English. So this is really a way, I think, that we sort of take these Arabic texts, we do selections from them and sort of shorter paperback versions in Arabic and distribute them to schools. This is certainly in the United Arab Emirates, and kind of hoping we can expand from there, but it's specifically aimed at introducing younger readers and hoping that this is going to be a way to expand their interest in these texts from 600, 800 years ago. This is essentially their literary heritage, which is kind of getting obliterated under the everything from Twitter to YouTube to Instagram to TikTok. So
that's completely fascinating. Looking at all your work, it seems like there's a combination of a desire to archive, but also a desire to also invent. So this kind of push and pull between the past and the present, how has that kind of impacted the work that you're doing? And I think Nanjala has kind of pointed to this, where there's a sense of claiming the language and bringing in ideas that maybe would not naturally be included in the language. Can you please talk to me about that push between archiving thing as it is and then inventing something new? Maybe we can begin with you, Nanjala.
Sure. I mean, I think this is the challenge of language, is that for me, at least in my experience, is that language is also a repository for a lot of ideas that, just simply will not survive if the language doesn't survive. And I've had the same experience as Salomon was describing, because my third language, my mother language, is, it doesn't really carry a lot of the things that I deal with on a day-to-day basis, because it was designed for a very specific context. And so you're able to plug in words in English and Kiswahili when you're in the city, but when you go to the village and you speak to someone who doesn't speak anything else, suddenly you realize that there are things that you can't describe and things that are integral to that context that you can't describe. And so there's always this tension of language as a repository for more than just words, as a repository for also codes and shorthands and connections that will not survive. I think about medicine, traditional medicine, and how, again, where I come from, there are names that are so specific to specific species of plants, not just, a family of plants, but a specific species of plants. And there's a repository of knowledge that exists in there that people who are able to make those connections are dying, and I think one of the things that we struggle with, I think, as people who speak these languages is creating a sense of urgency around these issues and creating a sense of urgency around preservation, because only a person who has that native speaker 360 experience will know what's missing and will have a sense of, here's the thing that you're not getting because of this translation. I think it's great. Kiswahili has an advantage, and it's the reason why we started with Kiswahili, because it's like French and German. There's an academy. There's an academy whose role it is to preserve and advance the language. We have the East African Kiswahili Commission. It's the only African language that is an official language at the African Union. So there's a bit of momentum behind Kiswahili, but the thinking is that because Kiswahili is a Bantu language family, language, that it will start off this impetus and create this urgency that I think is needed to resolve that tension. I think a lot of people don't realize how valuable language is to making sense of the world. And that's the tension that I think you're alluding to. I think that there are things that our forebears, our ancestors knew and were able to make connections to and were able to describe, that because we are existing in almost in translation, that we are I would say English, I am most fluent in English. I wouldn't call English my mother language, because there are aspects of my personality and my identity that do not come across in English. I like to think that I'm funnier in Kiswahili. I like to think that I'm, and it's that register and that connection, that, but at an aggregate scale, at a community level scale, that part of it is that urgency of us wanting us to be able to exist in a digital future without having that pressure of translation, of existing in translation, of existing in proxy, of existing sort of 1 degree removed from the fullness of ourselves. And it's big work, but if there's any problem that tech can solve, we keep throwing tech at a lot of problems that we probably shouldn't be throwing tech at. But I think if there's any problem that tech can solve, I think this is one of them, to preserve the language and create languages and create an opportunity for us to exist in this future in the fullness of ourselves, the funniest, the most sarcastic, the wittiest, the most endearing. Arabic, when you say good morning to someone in Arabic, you don't just say good morning, you say, I wish you a morning with flowers, sabah al-ward. And having that kind of fullness, I think, also is good for the future of humanity, which is a very big, vague thing to say, but I really do believe that it's true.
Oh, that's a wonderful answer. And yeah, I was going to come to you, Elinor, because I feel where you are with the language, with I'm going to pronounce it badly, but with that language, it feels like the first impetus is to archive the language. But is there space for invention? Quite yet, rather.
Yes, certainly. And I wanted to speak now because I'm a bit nervous. I see my power fading away. That's the challenges also of the internet. But I first of all, I want to make a plug for translators, not just because I want to get on the right side of Dr. Rosetti, but I think in this whole exercise, translators in saving South African languages, dying languages, translators are absolutely crucial. They are the bridge and they need to be paid. And African translators of African languages are not well paid. They're not well appreciated. Yeah. And there's practices, unfortunately, in South Africa. When I first came to this country, I loved in church how you would have a translator, simultaneous interpretation in church.
Yeah.
And I see, sadly, that practice is dying away, where the priest is now code switching, mainly in English, but code switching. And I think code switching is a problem. I mean, people have it in everyday conversation in mixed urban areas, but when it comes to actually producing sustained work in a language, that's where you need the translators. And I think there's a whole conversation, and I think the data scientists are developing the natural language processing to have machine translation, which kind of scares me. When I was talking to Bugani Marivati, I said, I don't want our translators to, African translators are so badly paid and appreciated. What will happen if now you can have a machine to do the translation? So that's a whole conversation. But I just want to talk quickly about the kind of systemic change that we should achieve. Next year is International Decade of Indigenous Languages that the UN has declared. And sometimes these UN decades, they have no, there's just a declaration, but what actually happens? And I think we should take this thing by the scruff of its neck and actually make it ours and have Pan-African conversations like this one and make things happen. And we also need to look at radio. If you say internet, But the role of radio, and I'll give South Africa as an example, 9 South African languages with different language platforms across different provinces in the country, 25 million people, and we listeners. And we've recently been doing a project for a proposal for a language advocacy organization called ILIFA. And when we had to fill in beneficiaries, you know, these donors, they always want you to say how many beneficiaries and where and what nonsense.
Yes.
And we just said, can we put 25 million? And then what we said was, if we reach 10% of those 25 million people, it's 2.5 million listeners. That's more than you can achieve through how many conferences and workshops. And I think that's what COVID has done. It's forced people onto these platforms, and we should take advantage and rely much more on, and I'm not saying there's no value in having the physical meetings and getting together and hugging each other when the time comes. I'm sure we'll do that. But I think we need to actually have these platforms digitally, and we need to link them to radio, because radio is extremely important. And one thing we realized is that we recently had a children's literature in 9 languages, and we realized that there's not enough intra-language conversation in African communities. And there's a lot of reasons for this. Part of the reason is that people are scared of ethnic mobilization and, you know, being accused of being tribalist. And I think that has worked against our development of language. So there's need for intra-language and inter-language conversations. And that's and also for more space for simultaneous interpretation in these kind of discussions. We had one person who presented and this was for me he did a PowerPoint presentation. It was in Ndebele with the English subtitles, and he presented it in the Ndebele language, so that people could see the English and at the same time, you know, so those are things that systemic changes that we can make. And one of the main ones also is African language departments. The curriculum needs to be brought to the 21st century. So you need to bring the Nanjalas and the Salomons into the African language departments, so that African language students are not just grammar, syntax thing. And this is where the new will be created.
Yeah. Wonderful. I think you because I was going to ask how is there space for invention. I completely agree that it's not just the internet that is this fantastic tool that we need to lean on, because I know you work also in publishing, so the physical book and that in that archiving in that sense. Could you tell us maybe about the book that you published and how that you've been distributing that, and maybe what you've learned from all the different strategies that you've employed so far?
Oh, the new book. Yes. Okay. So that book is published trilingually. So you have new, because we realized, I mean, you have no new speakers. So it's, a handful of new speakers. So you can't publish in new. So you have, it's a children's book illustration on one page, and then new, I should have brought it with me, new Afrikaans and English. Then we'll have another edition, new Nama and Afrikaans, then new Setswana, new Xhosa, new isiZulu, so that through you have the new as and people are expressing an interest. They're saying, the people who are buying the book say, can't you have Oma Katrina reading in new in YouTube? So on YouTube, we can read the book and we can hear her speaking new. So it's clearly having an impact. So, and it tells us that the physical book must go with the digital digital technology. So you must have the tech, you must have WhatsApp, YouTube, you can use all these things, but digital rights are really important. And also, I think a fundamental question is, how do you pay the content creators?
Yes.
Because we've had a publishing paradigm that has made it, which has been very unfair to non-Western educated people. And now the opportunity where they can, like Oma Katrina, can be directly available, even though she can't read and write. Her words are direct to an audience of millions. But how does she get paid? And that is a big question. And I think the data scientists, as they do this natural language processing, this is something we have to look at. The indigenous knowledge systems are not respected, or they're not validated. So like Katrina should be, and we're lobbying for that, she should be a professor of Ngu, because she's the world expert on Ngu.
Absolutely.
So that's what she should be doing, and she should be getting a salary as a university professor. And so I think that the saving of our languages, that validating of the archive, the people who hold the archive, and the people who create a new is absolutely essential. So our children's book is just one little step. We want to archive more stories, and there's a documentary being done about her, etc. So we hope that can help save the language, but it's still in a very precarious situation.
Salomon, in this space, I mean, I think just kind of in the same universe of the idea of archiving and all these challenges, are there more ways that we can have increase the presence of indigenous languages in the digital space? I know you talked about Masakani Web. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about what this space has done, what it has achieved, and what it hopes to do in the long term.
Yeah, great. I guess I'm really edified with the comment from every one of you. I think this is exciting to see that everyone from his area is trying to work, and we kind of have the same target and trying to preserve our languages. So regarding the question about the preserving and inventing, I think specifically for machine translation, like within Masakani, what we do, like in terms of the technology or the science, we try to reproduce what has been done for English. There is what we call the state of the art. So how far the science community have reached. So what is feasible is currently possible. For example, I moved to Germany at the beginning of my PhD, and I was a little bit lost because all the administration is in German. So I get my mailbox in German. I don't know any German. How am I going to survive? So only because there were scientists that worked on application where you can just take a picture of a German letter and get it in English. So this is how far as human we have reached. And the challenge that we have as African data scientists, can we first reproduce that? That can be seen like archiving, like trying to make to preserve and reach a certain level where we can have the same advantage and make our African language digital as well, because I can agree that it's true that we have a generation of people that were interested in books and spend a lot of time on library, but today the younger generation are on WhatsApp, as it was well said, they are on Facebook. So it's better to combine, to have the book, of course, because we still have young generation that read books as well, but it would be nice to also bring those technology in over the internet or on WhatsApp and all or TikTok and all the other technology. So in terms of archiving, we are trying to save languages, like to collect as much data. As you may know, machine learning work on one principle: the more data we have, the better are the translation. So if we have a lot of people contributing in data, if we can have like the cookbook that are written by Dr. Rosetti, we can use this data, for example, to build machine translation, parallel data, and so on. So we trying day after day to record more data to make our translation model better. But in terms of improvement, as you may know, language are different. So language are morphologically different. It may try to express the same thing, but with different depth, with different way of explaining. I really like the idea of the card to just show languages and how it express word from Swahili and English, and that is actually a space for invention, because there is a lot of publication that have gone, and all of them are based on how the community understand languages, mostly English, Chinese, or other languages. But when you start looking at it from the African perspective, you realize that when you study Swahili, it's only you that can discover this kind of things, because the Swahili is an entity by its own. Every African language has its own specificity. Like there is
Yeah,
a
no.
novelty behind studying a language. Just focusing on maybe in Lingala or in Kikongo or any other language, you realize that you have a huge space to bring a new thing. The community may have agreed that to check how a language is performing, let's use Blue Score. Or let's use this score, a mathematical score, or whatever. But you do your experiment and you come up that this doesn't work. It may work for English, it may work for Swahili, but I want to tell you that this also is a language, and this metric doesn't work well. And actually, we can provide another metrics with your perspective that can be adopted by the whole community. So that we are actually in an interface where we can bring novelty as well as trying to preserve our language. And maybe lastly, I can comment also on the Masakane web is we realize that Masakani, as we started, a lot of people that are getting involved are computer scientists, because you need to be able to understand a little bit the logic behind natural language processing and a little bit of mathematics in order to develop modern run notebooks. So we actually got funded by the Mozilla Foundation that we submit a proposal that we want to have something that look like Google Translate, a web application where we have someone that is not a computer scientist, maybe just a linguist, or maybe just someone who is studying history or any other science that they are not computer science. That person is an embodiment of knowledge for that specific language. So how can that person contribute to help the technology go forward? So the idea here is having a platform where you can write something in English, and our system will give you a translation in Yoruba, for example, or in Lingala. Those translations are not available anywhere. There is no online platform that does this kind of translation. So we have a lot for the moment. I think we have 35 African languages, and the list is growing day after day. And on the web for the moment, I think we have around 6 or 7, and we are increasing it as the technology allows, so that we can have a lot of African language. And we don't stop there. So the idea is, when you write something in English and you have a translation, maybe in Xhosa or I don't know, in Lingala, you have the ability to say if the system is wrong or right. And if the system is right, we are getting that feedback and help better the model. And if the system is wrong, we are asking you, can you please contribute? Can you please write the word that is supposed to be translated? And this is the contribution that we are looking into. And this is the novelty as well. We are actually gathering new data, not from someone randomly, but from someone who actually knows the language. Because as you are giving your contribution, we are asking you, how confident are you? Are you a native speaker of the language? And we have a lot of contribution. We are actually working on a paper where we'll release soon some statistic about how much new data we have collected and how the web platform is actually performing. So this is regarding the web platform, and we actually launched recently the speech platform as well. Not just translating word, but now you can write something in English and having say in this Senegalese language that we started with. What's the name again?
Wolof?
Wolof, yeah. So we have text to speech in Wolof. So you can write something and get the speech in Wolof. And we want to extend it. The future is having African language to African language translation. You put in Swahili and you get a translation in Lingala. We don't need to pass through English. So this is something we are looking forward to achieve in the future.
Yes. Nanjala, you had wanted to contribute something, perhaps?
Yeah. I just wanted to say, I mean, and I really appreciate this work that's being done in NLP, because I didn't know what NLP was until I started doing this project. Because after I announced the cards, I got like 3 or 4 different people saying, "Oh my gosh, we're working on this NLP project. Would you like to contribute?" And I was like, I don't know. I barely know how to change the time zones on my phone. So I say this to say, I appreciate the effort that people are putting into NLP, but I would like to piggyback off something that Elinor said, to say, can we think more expansively about what the internet can do? There's a great program that's being administered in New Orleans, I think, whereby people who are specialists in various niche subjects volunteer to teach courses in these subjects, and all the courses are virtual, and it's free for contributions.
So
you
MOOCs,
pay
basically.
whatever you whatever you want to contribute for that, and it helps the professor because a lot of humanities departments are getting shut down all over the world, and professors are looking for interesting ways to contribute. And I was thinking, beyond translation, beyond, taking that challenge of intelligibility, what about the challenge of preservation? What about, as you put it, the challenge of archiving? What about the challenge of, because I think the challenge of translation is, number one, African languages are very dynamic. There's one African language that never gets captured in all of these, not one, there's a handful of them, which is Pidgin, Creole, Shay, because a lot of us don't actually speak the high standard. It's the same with English. Most people don't speak, fluent Middle English. The language is constantly evolving. But I just, again, by example, the word that we used for matatu when I was a teenager, when I was a kid, is not the word that people are using today. The word, this language changes every 5 years. It changes every 5 kilometers. It changes because it reflects that dynamism. And if we get hung up on the idea of intelligibility, I worry that the work of archiving is going to fall behind, and the work of teaching and the work of contextualizing is going to fall behind, because it's not as one-to-one tech. It's not necessarily a one-to-one tech problem. So it's really just to put on the table, can we try and also think creatively about, I would love to take a class, and I would love to, maybe I'm not going to get fluent in it, but maybe I'll be able to say, hi, hello, how are you? Where is the bus stop? Can I have a snack? And I think, with Arabic, for example, and this is because this is context that I'm familiar with, refugees from Syria are teaching Arabic language online through Skype, through whatever, you pay a small amount and things like that. Can we think that way about African languages as well? So that we're moving beyond the challenge of intelligibility and starting to think archiving, preservation, contextualization.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really, really, really good question, because what I was going to ask Dr. Rosetti was, okay, so you are publishing books, you're doing the archiving, you are translating, you're basically inventing, well, in a sense, but don't be scared. But I wonder, what is the space of advocacy, and how much power does a translator have? Because I was going to ask that to Salomon. Are there people who are kind of enthusiastic immediately and throwing money behind these things, or is it kind of like an uphill task to say this is important, pay attention to this?
Yes, this is a big issue across any translator I work with or are familiar with. I work with the PEN America Foundation and on their translation committee. So I'm routinely in touch with translators working in other languages, in Japanese or German or what have you. And it is essentially, particularly for languages like Arabic, where there really is, when you're approaching publishers or magazine publishers, and again, I'm speaking from being based in the U.S., but even dealing with English language publishers, you start from a pretty low level. I mean, you have to assume people don't know your author that you're promoting. You may be in love with the author, think this is a wonderful book, major novel, but again, you have to sort of really, you have to be the literary agent. You have to be the chief cheerleader, promoter for this. And of course there is, do all the work, you're doing all the work yourself up front, hoping that someone will. So it's very rare that you get the situation where a publisher will say, I'm already interested in this. I'd like to pay you something to do a chapter. So you have some fee there that you're invested. If we go ahead, great, we'll put the book under contract. But so it's a lot of work up front. It can be very rewarding when you finally hit a match and there is a nice response. This is one reason why I'm a big fan of literary prizes and awards for things that help things like translating languages. In that, it's more important than the financial reward. The author or a translator gets a amount of money. Even more than that, it signals to publishers outside of the language, this is an important book. This was deemed an important text or important novel or poetry in this language. Maybe you should take a look at this. And that particularly works for things like Arabic, when there are Arabic language, book prizes, book awards that sort of, at least if you're a British publisher, you're an American publisher, you may know nothing about this author. This may be new to you, but at least you have a sense of, here's the short list. These are books I should be interested in. Maybe one of these might be right for my my publishing house. So that helps, but again, that means you have to have the funding for it, and that's hard to do. That's the tricky part. I would say, talking about what Salomon said about that sounds amazing. The translation, essentially creating your own Google Translate, as it were, for 35 languages so far, I think you said.
Yeah. Out of 2,000, though.
Yeah, right. That's a great start, though. That's incredible. To sort of,
absolutely.
We're sort of living in a world where we have to sort of operate under the rules that aren't necessarily set up for the books we're interested in, the languages we're interested in. I'll just tell a story from my own working my book series. One of the first things we did when we first started bringing out our print books is say, okay, we need to do ebooks to reach the electronic book audience. And we realized, of course, that Amazon, with its massive footprint in the world, its Kindles, for years, they were not interested in doing right-to-left ebooks. So you couldn't do anything that had Arabic or Hebrew or Persian or any language that read right-to-left, simply because Amazon had decided that's not a market we want to go after. It would have been very simple for them to fix something in their Kindles. It's just that Kindles couldn't do it. So I recall, our books are printed in the U.S. We had some meetings with someone from Amazon who I think was, more or less not interested in sort of changing their rules. But it took a number of years before finally in 2018, I think it was, Amazon said, okay, we'll press a button and our Kindles are now readable right to left. So that opened up a world. That essentially meant we were kind of held hostage making this available. Now there's other options as well. And Salomon, I don't know, when EPUB 3 came out, I'm no expert on electronic publishing, but I know when that format came out, that was a major game changer for publishing, for publishers in the Arab world who wanted to get their books online, wanted to get their books done electronically. So I know there was a mad scramble, I think in 2015 or so, when this EPUB 3 suddenly made it possible to publish these books that publishers had on their backlists in Cairo, in Beirut, and trying to scramble to get them out and available. So, and I'm wondering too if in all the 35 languages that you're translating, or that show up on your site, do you have any problems with characters, unusual characters that don't register on the screen, like sort of words or letters? I'm not sure if these are being translated into other scripts other than English, or other than, but are there particular characters that Google is not recognized, or that the is not showing up on people's screen? That's always been an issue with us.
Yeah, I guess that's actually a wonderful question, because we when we started working on this, and we realized that there were a lot of technical issues. For example, because when you have a raw language, the current tokenizer, as we call it, tool that allow to split word in token and stuff like that, are majorly designed thinking about well resourced language. And when you work on language like Fawn or some other language, you can see that there are some character that it's difficult to know how to split it, how to tokenize it. How does it map from that language to English? How does it map to French, for example? So we try a lot of experiment. Actually, that's why we actually published in our first paper, which was a paper with a lot of authors, because this is what we did. We came together and we built our first paper, which is currently with a lot of citation. People are citing it all over the world, and we actually realized that by doing mapping between different languages, there were room to discover that there is stuff beyond English. There are some characters that we need as a community to think on what is the best way to encode it, and what is the best way to deal with this specific scenario. So I agree, there are strange characters, as I can call it strange, because it doesn't actually follow the norm as a thing that we usually see on Google also. Yeah. And maybe one last thing, we have a colleague in the community that actually designed keyboards, for example, because they realized that the traditional keyboard doesn't fit for the language. Let's make a keyboard. So that we have a keyboard for fun, for example, where it allows someone to type with actually the character that are appropriate for that specific language.
Oh, that's incredible. So many interventions. Was there somebody? Yes, Elinor, please.
On Inmu, if you look at the book, okay, there's the book there.
Yes.
Now the click, if you look at the International Phonetic Alphabet, that long letter, so it's nga. So now that click is hard on a keyboard. So the linguist also adapted it to have a backslash because that works on the cell phones as well. So there has to be a conversation with the new community, Oma Katrina and the family, and the linguists. So that, and I'm advising them that rather than have this long, the correct international phonetic, let's use the backslash. Then it's straightforward. But I just so that is the book, and that is the trilingual letters, and we're very excited because it's done by an indigenous from the Khoi community, also the artist as well.
Oh, wonderful.
I just like to say quickly, Janada, you've started something. You started the ball rolling, and you need to carry on these conversations. I think it's really urgent. This is really just the start. I think it's the start of something very exciting. And my colleagues would kill me if I didn't mention that the Puku website, puku.co.za, where you can get a copy of the book, and we will also cover what is happening in your conference. And I think we need to have future more collaborations. So I'll certainly be in touch with you on an individual basis. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I hope everybody sees points of collaboration all across. Because we mentioned, Dr. Rosetti mentioned a prize, I want to bring in the Nyabola Prize for, let me get that correct, let me say it correctly, Nyabola Prize for writing science fiction and speculative fiction in Kiswahili. And what I like about it is exactly what Dr. Rosetti mentioned, that by giving prizes, you spotlight a language and you bring attention to it. I'm curious though, have you ever heard of the term, I'm gonna massacre it, hyperstition, which is the idea of fictions making themselves true? Is that something anybody has come across? And what I found so interesting about it is that it's almost like it's basically the idea of the imagination. So all these sci-fi texts that exist that imagined phones, or for example a film like Space Odyssey 2001, I think, and how like the things that we see there now have become quite real, or something like Blade Runner. So the space of imagination and creating that. And I wonder if for you, merging the real words that you had created and this opportunity to create fictive text, whether there's a correlation there about the imagination making stuff come to life.
It's not even a correlation. It's 100% what I was trying to do. And the reason I did that was it was the pandemic. So the idea of doing something in translation, the project actually has 3 parts. The first part is the translation and the flashcards. The second part is the language prize. And the third part is a series of opinion pieces to be published in Kiswahili language publications on current affairs of technology. So the first one was about the data leak with the Office of the Deputy of the Registration of Political Parties in Kenya. The second one is about the Pegasus hacking situation. It's really to show this language, these translations in motion, and to see that Kiswahili can actually keep up with tech news. So the language prize was actually inspired by the pandemic in a way, because almost as soon as people started to talk about surveillance tech and the pandemic, the reference point was not some obscure report or whatever. It was George Orwell in 1984. It was Aldous Huxley and what was A Brave New World? A Brave New World. It was, Ursula Le Guin and Octavia Butler, and seeing that energy, that people who work in the surveillance tech, digital rights space, instantly reaching for fiction is what really inspired this language prize, because I want there to be not an English book translated into Kiswahili, but maybe we create a Kiswahili classic that speaks to our context in East Africa. What are our fears? And we had workshops with the people who were inviting to submit the prize, open to the public, completely free, invited leading Kiswahili writers to teach and to speak. And that's what we said to them. We said, look around you, think about tech, think about your society. What scares you? What inspires you? What gives you hope? What do you think the next 10 years in East Africa, 20 years in East Africa looks like with technology? Because I think our fears are not always going to be the same. And I've seen this in, again, like I said, in the digital rights work. You know, when people in the West don't worry about certain things because they say, well, the legislatures will take care of that. We have laws for that. And we tell them, well, actually, the law can often be the problem. When we were talking about the Huduma number and the digital ID, the law was the problem. It was the government was the problem, not the solution. And so it was a one-to-one thing. It was something that I'm hoping that if we get a utopianist book that gives us hope and helps us to imagine a positive tech future, but maybe we get a dystopian set of stories that are warning signs and that help us to understand, you know, the threats that maybe are not perceptible to nonfiction, but fiction writers, because of their capacity for imagination and invention and connecting things, might be able to flag something that we, the nonfiction people, might not see. If you think about the sheer number of ideas in 1984 that we talk about so casually, Big Brother, you know, and this is a book that's written in 1984, 1985. Doublespeak. All of these words are Orwell constructions, you know, literary constructions. So that's really what I'm hoping we'll get, and maybe not necessarily with this batch of stories, although I haven't read them yet. But maybe eventually the momentum gets us there, that there's someone out there who is able to tell fiction, to tell stories in a way that doesn't belabor, like the story doesn't become a moralistic burden, but is just a visionary and a perception and is connected to our social political context. Because, you know, like I said, I firmly believe that language is not just words. And I think everybody in this panel will agree. It's not just words, it's words in context, it's words in society, it's words in motion. So that's what we're hoping for.
Oh, thank you so much for that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to that text when it comes out. Just to conclude the panel, can you believe we've been talking for an hour, guys? Oh, crazy. What are those, are there any kind of practical tips we can use to kind of expand practice and skills in the space? Is there ways we can build, are there ways rather we can build communities that kind of amplify and adopt the work that we've done? What is there a funding process? How can we turn this tide? Because I mean, you four of you are representing, you know, your colleagues, you know, you as I believe Maya Angelou said, I stand as one. I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. So I feel like that's what you're doing in your various capacities. But how can we assist you? What are the things that we could do to make your work you know, resonate more and have that a bigger reach? Maybe we can start with Salomon, because he's in the future. So tell us, what tips could you give us?
Yeah, great. Thanks. I guess like this is actually a very important question, and I think that it's our responsibility, because if not us, who? If not now, when? So we should start now, and I guess every one of us in any level, specifically for anyone maybe involved in government policies makers, to allocate funding to initiatives that are going on in the continent that are looking forward into preserving languages. We should make our language exciting enough for the future generation. Today we have people that are excited. For example, I'm normally a French speaker because I did all my study in French, so French is mother tongues, even though I don't want to say that, but I spend all my time speaking French. And usually in Congo and most French country, when someone speaks French, people are happy. This guy is educated, people are excited. But I think we need to turn the other way around. It should be the other way. When you hear someone speaking Chiluba or Kikongo, you say, this is interesting. And for that to take place, we need actually the government to have that in mind, that we need to focus in when we build our annual or our plan, our budget to allocate funding for university, for researchers, to finance people to actually put language together, to archive existing language, to support journals actually in a way or another, in such a way that we can actually have enough data, we have enough archive that can help build modern technology in life for the future generation. So that's the first call. And also for people that may be listening to this live, and you may be wondering, how can I get involved? You can, for example, we have a website. If you just type Masakane, you will find a lot of, we have a Twitter account. You can follow us on Twitter, and we have a website, we have a Slack channel. Even if you are not computer scientists, come along. We have a NLP session where we teach people from ground up. You can learn what to do, where to start from, because we need you. We need you. If you notice that you have been stressed by not seeing your language in any technology platform, come and join us. Let's make it happen.
Oh, wonderful. Rallying call. Elinor, are there any tips that you could advise the community that's listening? How do we assist you to your work?
Yes, I think we need to take an ecosystem approach. So we like this conversation here where you have I think literally people need to look at the ecosystem. It's not just literature. It's the infrastructure. If we're talking about internet, we need to also, the fight for Africans to have access to reliable sources of power is important. I think from a literary point of view, I'd like to say there's something we left out, which was reviewing books. Because and on our website, on our YouTube channel now, Puku, we've just developed the first online book reviewing course in isiXhosa. So it's the first one in an African language that we know of, because book reviewing is really neglected. So and we did that with the Presidential Employment Stimulus fund, which, so at least I can acknowledge that the South African government and the National Arts Council for supporting us to do that. I think the support is really important, but I think also we just need to be quite aggressive in our advocacy around languages. One of the things I was thinking of is we need to approach African billionaires and ask them, have any of them, if you look at the big people, Mo Ibrahim, Strive Masiwa, any of them really given anything to African languages? So maybe let's mobilize to say, this is a decade of indigenous languages. Yeah. You guys, please come to the party.
Oh,
but we plan. So let's do that.
Let's do that. Dr. Rosetti, are there any tips that you could suggest, practical tips that you would suggest perhaps to assist individuals in the work that you do?
Yes, I mean, it's. I was thinking more in sort of broader terms. I mean, one is just simply the best way I think to help individuals is for us all to sort of push for a wider reception for translations, for reading books reading texts in translation. In some ways, it's wonderful to have the supply side, as it were, the demand side, that sort of, these books in translation are something that you, even if this is not your native language, you should be interested in reading this. Open yourselves up to. As I think Nanjala said, there is sort of different ways of thinking. There are sort of whole wisdoms, knowledge systems that are available in other languages that can be accessible to you via translation. And part of that also as well is it's always, again, we spoke about this, others have said this, it's translators. The role of translators needs to be needs to be clarified, the importance of translators. Part of that is paying them more. A better wage, but also to make the general sense is that we're not quite at the machine translation stage yet. You can't simply put a work of literature in, get a lovely poetry out. Maybe in 10, 15 years, Salomon, maybe you're working on that right now, and putting us all out of business. But until then, the idea that a translator really has to plays an important creative part in making these things available, making literature available in different languages. So that's sort of an ongoing issue that I think on the greater level helps individual translators.
Yeah.
I can say that we are not sorry, we're not going to replace you.
No,
Definitely,
okay.
we actually need you so that we can, with your help, we can do what. Because the idea that we are working into is not the machine alone. We need the human and the machine integration so that we can reach the top level. Yeah.
Right.
Wonderful. And just as a follow-up to something that you mentioned way earlier regarding how, Arabic doesn't really, it's not as in a precarious position as other languages. Would you say there are things we could learn perhaps from how Arab translation has kind of moved in the world? I mean, given that it has kind of like that security and that kind of dominance, are there things we can learn from that to apply to the work that we do?
Yes, I mean, I certainly what Elinor, you had mentioned about sort of billionaires contributing to sort of promote translation, to promote languages. I mean, that would seem Mo Ibrahim would be a wonderful sort of person, for example, to support an award, the annual award in the name of the billionaire, to promote indigenous languages, to promote African languages in translation, or to broaden or for other projects. That would seem like an obvious way for someone looking for their legacy, but that is something that's happened with Arabic. There certainly have been wealthy individuals, some in the Gulf, some in Egypt, who have left prizes. There's a Sawiris Literary Prize in Egypt by the Sawiris family, Al-Babtain Prize from the Gulf. So those are I guess good models to use, and again, from a wealthy person's perspective, this is an unimpeachable cause. I mean, this is a wonderful cause to support, to have your name attached to. So, I mean, I hope that is successful, and that maybe we'll see some more prizes in the future coming out for supporting African languages.
Wonderful. And the one person who actually has an award in their name. Are there any other any practical tips, Nanjala, that you can suggest perhaps to assist the work that you do, or maybe having listened to your colleagues here?
Please forgive me. I'm going to do this last section without video because my battery is low, so I'm plugged into the wall.
No.
I think, well, first of all, I need to put it on the table that I'm not a billionaire. This is all the money came from a billionaire institution, and but I will say this: I was surprised at how enthusiastic people were. Even when I was proposing the prizes, I thought to myself, oh, this is too small. People are not going to be interested in this. We've had almost 300 submissions from all over the world.
Wow.
And people are really enthusiastic. So to anybody, I don't even want to say billionaires. I want to say to anybody who is thinking along these lines, who wants to be part of this conversation, it's not as expensive as you might think. And people are really hungry for spaces and opportunities like this. So the money that this came from Stanford, Mabati Cornell, also comes from Cornell University. If there are Western universities that want to partner with institutions, universities that have big endowments, that's also an opportunity. I know that Harvard and Yale have enormous African language programs. CIA connections, long story, but they do have enormous language programs. And so these kinds of partnerships can really help. That's one thing. The other thing I would say is for us as the speakers of the language is to speak them and to use them. So there is a selfish element that undergirds all of this project, all of this work for me, which is that I wanted to get better at speaking Kiswahili. I wanted to be able to write about the work that I do in Kiswahili. And yeah, I dragged 3 countries into my personal pet project. But what I really hope is that this also demonstrates to other people that our languages have value, as I'm in the process of demonstrating it to myself. And so it's really just, I think that's the simple part, is we have to use our languages and we have to involve them in our professional lives. A lot of us are in contexts whereby if you're in a post-colonial state, the European language is the formal language, is the useful language, is the official language, is the professional language, and the African language is the home language. You know, you're thinking about Peter Eke and the duality of the post-colonial identity. But I think that decolonization demands that we reconcile that gap. that we try to reconcile that duality that we exist in. And maybe that involves giving primacy to the African identity, to the part of us that is, you know, and this, it's decolonialization, it's also feminism, to the personal, to politicize the personal, and to make the language in which we are funny and charming and witty and smooth, make that the primary language, not just the language of bureaucracy, not just the language of efficiency, not just the language of this is how I appear in the public space. So let's, most practical tips, let's use the languages, and let's make using the languages common and organic and integral to our public expression of our African identity.
Oh, and on that wonderful note, asanteni sana, vegyo mono. I am so grateful for your time, all of you, for your wonderful insights, fantastic tips, and just really giving an understanding of why this work is important. To our viewers, thank you also for sitting through this conversation. I hope it has inspired many questions. Please respond to anything you've heard today on our Twitter account. Our account is @JaladaAfrica. Our website is www.jaladaafrica.org, where you can find this and more conversations. This conversation is part of a larger symposium. It's a 2-day celebration of Professor Ngoge Wathiongo and Professor Wole Soyinka, both of whom are literary greats who we celebrate and who we adore. And they are both authors in our translation series. But really, this has been about all 4 of you. And thank you so much for your insights, and have a wonderful evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.